On the Sky News Daily today, how artificial intelligence, AI, is driving an explosion of realistic but fake naked sexual images of women.
I just felt my whole world kind of fall away from me, and it was just utter devastation, shock. I was seeing images of me that weren't real, but that looked very, very real in sexually explicit situations. And I just didn't know how to explain it to my partner, to my parents, my friends, colleagues, if they ever came across these, that they looked like me, but they're not.
That's Jodie, which isn't her real name, and she's describing the moment she saw fake pictures of herself.
They were so realistic. I mean, it's really shocking. And I think if they had been done now, kind of 3 years later, they would have been even more realistic. But to anyone that didn't know where those images originated, they would have no idea that they weren't real.
Jodie's photos have been altered using AI, turning into realistic pornographic content with her face on them without her knowledge, by someone it turned out that she knew. Jodie is one of a growing number of women dealing with deepfake nudes, as the software to digitally transform a clothed picture into a naked one is now easier to get hold of. I'm Matt Barbet, and on this episode we're looking at how tech companies and the law are allowing this to happen. Later, I'll be talking to an expert in the legal regulation of pornography and online abuse. But first, Jodie shares her story. Jodie, you were pointed to a website where these images were being commissioned. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's essentially a forum which has been created to allow men to live out their fantasies, whatever that might be. So there was so-called revenge porn. There was lots of intimate image abuse of real women using their real images. There was also men on there who were asking users to get in contact with women that they knew in real life via Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and to abuse them online. And this was just one section of that forum, which was dedicated to deepfaking women. And yeah, that's where my images had ended up.
And that's what you've been directed to by this anonymous emailer. When you saw this then, so you started to piece it together and you realised that it was one image in particular that you'd sent to someone who was a friend of yours.
Yeah, so at the top of this particular post, there was a user who was asking for other users on this forum to fake me. And he had posted real images of me from my Instagram. But he had also posted an image of me and him with him cropped out of it. So I knew who it was from that image. And really that was the smoking gun that led me to working out that it was my best friend behind it.
Describe that moment when you saw that image with them cropped out and you realised who it was.
It just felt like the ultimate betrayal and humiliation. I don't think that anything can really prepare you for that moment in time. But I had been experiencing online abuse in lots of different forms for around 5 years by that point. And so I think that realization that it was my best friend and someone that I trusted very, very dearly, it really it broke my heart, because I knew that he really understood how much it was affecting me, and he really got it. He was an ally. He was a strong advocate for women and women's rights. And it was that sense of, oh, well, it was all just a lie. And then questioning basically everything else in my life at that point.
Did you ever suspect that this is Alex Wolff, is his name? Did you ever suspect that your best friend at the time would be doing this kind of thing? Was there any sort of inkling that maybe he had different feelings for you, or was living out a slightly different life online than you realised?
No, I mean, this is a man who really had every privilege in life. He had a double first from Cambridge. He had lots of friends. He had won BBC Young Composer of the Year. He had his whole life ahead of him, and he was on track to being a very, very successful man who was loved by so many people as well. You know, he had a very supportive family. There was no reason, in my mind, there was no reason why he had ended up doing this.
So what happened next?
Well, I decided to not confront him. I just knew that he would lie to me, and I didn't want to hear the lies. So I went to the City of London police and I reported the crime to them. I spent around 3 hours in the police station with my housemate, who was also a victim, because her images were also on this website. And we explained who we thought it was. We showed them all of the evidence, and they didn't take any notes, but they had a recording device on the vest. And so I just assumed that they would write it up afterwards, and we would do our kind of statements later on in the process. But the next day I got a call and they said that they didn't feel a crime had actually been committed.
Which, given what you've described and the emotional pain, the emotional trauma, I'm going to say, that you would have experienced seeing these and thinking you're going to have to explain yourself to your parents and other people who care for you, that must have been a jaw-dropping moment for you.
I just felt completely minimized and dismissed by the police. And over the other years of abuse that I had endured, various forms of image abuse, I had been to the police before, and they had always said, if you don't know who's behind it, there's very little that we can do. So I did feel that I could then trust that they would be able to do something once I knew who it was. And so, yeah, I felt really let down, really disappointed. And I think that that's how lots of women feel when they deal with the police, unfortunately.
It turns out that Alex Wolff was later convicted of offences against 15 women, not just you, Jodie, but it was mostly down to how you persevered in the face of, you know, the attitude of the police, which, you know, you obviously found incredibly underwhelming. But then again, what he was convicted of wasn't exactly what you wanted him to be convicted of, was it?
No, so we did end up going to the Metropolitan Police. This was in the wake of the horrific murder of Sarah Everard, and there was a big public campaign for women of any kind of abuse of any description to feel that they were able to go to the Metropolitan Police and report it. So we did go there, and we went through a very similar process of spending 3 hours or so reporting it. And this time we did sign statements and we explained who we thought it was, and they did take it very seriously, and they did say that they felt a crime had been committed. However, they didn't feel that it was a crime necessarily to do with the images. So actually they felt that this was a communications offence. So really what he was convicted of eventually was the language that he was using on some of the other posts, where he was being grossly offensive, and the language was pretty disgusting, but it didn't really take into consideration the image abuse, and it definitely didn't take into consideration the deepfake abuse that I had endured as part of those 15 women.
Look, he was given a suspended sentence in the end because of the conviction for those crimes that you said the Metropolitan Police felt meant he'd broken the law, and he was ordered by the court to pay £100 to each of his victims. Look, no jail time here, a relatively small fine. I mean, a maximum of £1,500 that he had to pay for this. Was that satisfactory in any way? Did you get any sense that you got the justice you wanted?
I think at the time we did feel that we had some sense of justice. We weren't expecting a lot going into that because we had read the sentencing guidelines. He pled guilty at the earliest opportunity. He hadn't committed a crime before. So we weren't expecting anything more than that, unfortunately. But yeah, definitely in hindsight and looking back, I don't feel that he got what he kind of deserved. We each got £100 in compensation. I spent over a year in weekly therapy sessions, and £100 unfortunately doesn't go very far in paying for that. So, and as part of his punishment, and I put that in inverted commas, he got court mandated sexual rehabilitation therapy, which was obviously absolutely necessary because of the crime that he had committed. But it does seem amazing that he was afforded that while the victims were basically sent off with £100 and a restraining order against someone that, for many of those women, they considered a dear friend.
A lot of violence against women and girls, but particularly online abuse, just isn't yet taken seriously by the society generally, but also by the police.
Clare McGlynn is a professor of law at Durham University, and she focuses on cyberflashing and image-based sexual abuse.
We hear stories like Jodie's many times over when women go to the police to ask for help. And it's getting particularly worse with the growth in AI and sexually explicit deepfakes, because it's so prolific and it's so common, but the police don't really have the resources yet or the inclination to take this seriously enough. This is why we need change now to make the creation of these sexually explicit deepfakes a criminal offence. Because this is kind of like a new form of voyeurism. You know, people might be familiar with the idea of someone, say, standing outside your window, bedroom window, looking at you, recording you, filming you in a changing room. That's voyeurism, and that's a criminal offence. And sexually explicit deepfakes are kind of, if you like, the new frontier, the new AI way of doing that, and the law has not yet caught up with it.
Do you know, it reminds me of someone I used to work with who got convicted of exactly that, voyeurism, and they got a 2-year prison sentence. Yeah, you hear about someone like Alex Wolff submitting Jodie to all this terrible experience, and they get a suspended sentence and a £1,500 fine.
Yeah, it's inadequate. And some of these images, the word nude and deepfake porn just doesn't really capture it. I mean, I've spoken to women whose images have been put into basically schoolgirl rape. That's the kind of porn sometimes we're talking about here. And it's deeply traumatizing. They have graduation photographs or photographs when they're out having coffee with their mum are then transformed into this sort of horrific, sexually explicit, abusive material. And it's really harmful.
And the access to these powerful tools that enable people to manipulate these images, these are things people can download onto their phones relatively easily.
Oh, you're absolutely right. These apps that you can use are accessed through X, through Instagram, through TikTok. They're advertised on Google. They're advertised on the porn sites. This is really straightforward, easy technology to get hold of. And within minutes, you can generate some of these images without someone's consent.
Claire, let's set a bit of context on this, because as long as we've had the internet, it seems to have been those people using it for the wrong reasons are keeping one step ahead of the legislators and the police and the authorities. That was the case when the internet first came about. It still seems to be the case now when it comes to the deep fakes and the use of AI.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things that drive technology, and we've seen this over the decades. One is porn and one is abuse. So you see this in the area of domestic abuse and the use of technology to perpetrate that domestic abuse. And they've driven the development of that technology. And porn is the same. You know, the very first deep fakes were from a man developing the tech to create non-consensual porn. That, you know, and he didn't want porn generally. He wanted non-consensual porn. And all this deepfake technology came from that drive. Now, what it just means, though, is that in society, if we find this unacceptable, and I do, we need to actively keep up with this. Another example might be Taylor Swift, as many people will know, had sexually explicit deepfakes of her, and like 47 million people worldwide viewed them. That was generated using Microsoft technology. Microsoft just did not have the guardrails, as they call them, in place to stop that happening. They didn't care enough to prevent it. And that's what we need to make these companies do more to prevent this material and this harm.
The corporations, it's certainly not the case they don't have the money. They're some of the richest businesses in the world. So what can be done to push them into caring and actually doing something about this?
So we've got the beginnings of that approach. In the UK, we have an Online Safety Act, which was introduced, which is supposed to hold these platforms to account. We're not yet seeing, though, a very strong regulator demanding those companies take action in this area around violence against women and girls. The guidance, the draft guidance we've had is relatively weak. It seems to not be being a priority. The rhetoric's there, but the action is not yet there. So we've got the opportunity, but we actually just have to have the determination to see it through, to face down these companies, basically.
Are politicians getting what they need to bring this about? I mean, not many politicians end up doing the thing they're necessarily expert in. When it comes to technology and the fast pace at which AI seems to be developing, is it just hopeless to think that they are going to keep up with this and legislate for it properly?
I'm not sure that is the issue, because at root of lots of these problems are some basic common threads. So at root here is, frankly, it's kind of misogyny, and it's using this technology to, perpetrate abuse. So you can have that knowledge and want to do something about it, and then you speak to the experts and you require the experts to actually act and do something. And so, for example, we've got the Online Safety Act, and then we've got a regulator, Ofcom, but Ofcom has taken a very kind of risk-averse approach so far. It's not taken the approach of wanting to see a big step change here. So I think it's less about the politicians, as you suggest, because they can say, I want action. It's a priority for me. And then we expect the regulators and the others to make that happen.
Thank you very much indeed to Professor Clare McGlynn. So that's the regulation. But what about the people who are behind the deepfakes? Jodie, back to you. When it comes to punishments, what changes would you like to see?
Well, I think that the key thing is having really clear legislation for the specific offence of creating deepfake material. At the moment, it's a massive loophole in legislation. So it's illegal to distribute deepfake porn, as it's commonly referred to, but it's not an offence to actually create it, or in what happened in my case, solicit it. So ask someone else to create it for you. Really what we're asking for, and what we want, and what survivors need as well, is legislation that closes the loopholes, that makes sure that perpetrators are put off from doing this in the first place. And also it's really important that we have specialist services that are properly funded. The Revenge Porn Helpline, for example, they do amazing work for getting this material off the internet, but they need more money. And there's lots of other organizations out there that can help with this as well. And it's also really important to make sure that we're able to access, and that children are able to access, preventative education to stop people from doing this in the first place. I think that when I was at school, this technology didn't exist. So for children now being able to access porn so easily, and there not being the same societal barriers to accessing porn as well, I think we're in a really dangerous situation where we are almost inciting young people to do this, to friends at school, to maybe teachers. In some cases, we've heard of people doing this up to their parents. And we're just living in a really precarious situation right now where the legislation just isn't keeping up fast enough with the pace of this technology.
I appreciate what you've told us, Jodie, about both the awful experience you've been through and what your campaign to change. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
You can read a lot more analysis of the use of AI in creating fake nude images by our home editor, Jason Farrell, and that's online at skynews.com. Thanks for listening.